Trump's Department of Justice is getting increasingly reactionary as the walls close in, the Epstein file deadline approaches, and more information leaks out about exactly what's going on behind closed doors.
Any domestic terrorist organization that poses a threat to the homeland as we speak.
I'd say the first one, President Trump had just announced executive order domestic terrorist organization, Antifa. That's our primary concern right now.
All right, that's what President Trump did. What does the FBI say?
We share the same view. When you look at the data right now, you look at the domestic terrorist threat that we're facing. Right now, what I see from my position is that's the most immediate violent threat that we're facing on the domestic side.
So where is Antifa headquartered?
What we're doing right now with the organization.
Where in the United States does Antifa exist?
Yep.
If it's a terrorist organization and you've identified it as number one.
We are building out the infrastructure right now.
So what does that mean? We trying to get the information. You say Antifa is a terrorist organization. Tell us as a committee, how did you come to that? Where do they exist? How many members do they have in the United States as of right now?
Well, that's very fluid. It's ongoing for us to understand that. The same, no different than Al Qaeda and ISIS.
No, I don't want you. I'll ask one question, sir. I just want you to tell us. If you said Antifa is the number one domestic terrorist organization operating in the United States, I just need to know where they are, how many people. I don't want a name. I don't want anything like that. Just how many people have you identified with the FBI that Antifa is made of?
Well, the investigations are active.
So you wouldn't come to this committee and say something you can't prove, I know. I know you wouldn't do that. But you did.
If the president declared an organization a terrorist organization or DTO, which is on a secret list, and you were ordered to attack them on U.S. soil, would you carry out that order?
Senator Reid, as with any order I would assess the order, consult the legal authorities to ensure that it was a lawful order, and I would, if I had questions, I would elevate that to the chairman and the secretary, as they welcome at all times. And if I had no concerns and I was confident in the lawful order, I would definitely execute that order.
At this point, too many lines have been crossed, and so I too resigned. The threats against current members of the legal community, both in public service and private practice, are real, and they're of consequence. To those attorneys facing such threats, I share with you a message that I received on the day that my colleagues and I were ordered to dismiss the Adams case. It came from a fellow Marine. It read, "Keep your head up and keep your values and your oath at the forefront." Every attorney who takes an oath to uphold the law, and every citizen who values democracy must have a line in the sand that cannot be crossed. Speaking out and doing the right thing increasingly comes with personal risk. But the day after I resigned, my sister had her first daughter. And I want my niece to know the same democracy that I've known. That's worth any cost. That's worth fighting for.
On December 4th, Attorney General Pam Bondi issued an internal directive to law enforcement agencies instructing them on how to implement National Security Presidential Memorandum 7. We need to talk about this order that Trump put out, the NSPM 7, the National Security Presidential Memorandum 7, which is not an executive order, despite many people stating to the contrary that it is. And basically, it's them saying we have to end this scourge of left-wing political violence, which we're going to pretend is a thing. And to help root that out, we've got a whole bunch of behaviors and thoughts, I guess, that can be indicators that you might be a left-wing terrorist. So you've been talking a lot about this online. You've got a great article up on your Substack about it. It hasn't been widely discussed. Tell us a little bit about why you think this order is so important.
Well, I think it just sounds so surreal and over the top that it has been written off as just another one of Trump's crazy things that he says, of which he has said many in his executive orders. There are over 200 now. And unfortunately, it got misreported by outlets that should know better. I saw C-SPAN was calling this an executive order. It is not that. It is one of just 7 that exist this term of what are called presidential national security memoranda. And what those do, unlike executive orders, which tend to be a little bit more narrowly focused, I'm not saying they're insignificant, but they're more about the day-to-day of government. Just to give you one example, an executive order that he released instructed the federal government to remove references to transgender ideology from websites and things. But in the case of presidential national security memoranda, this is like a sweeping, overarching, just like strategy. This is what we're going to be focused on for the next 3 years. And what this memoranda instructed, sometimes they're classified. This is the 7th one this year. And so number 6 is classified. We don't know what's in it. Fortunately, for whatever reason, the administration chose to release this one. And basically, it tells the whole of federal law enforcement to focus on, as you said, this scourge of they say radical violence and thing. And so the question is, what does that mean? So when you approach something from a counter-terror framework, unlike traditional crime fighting, which is some crime has been committed, and then you go collect evidence, you present it to a court and try to make your case that this person is guilty of it, and then the jury decides. Counterterrorism tries to preempt crime, and this memorandum makes that very clear. At one point, it says it says something like prevent these crimes before they've taken place. Mm-hmm. And so that's characteristic of counterterrorism, but in a sense, it's like pre-crime, because how do you charge a crime that hasn't occurred yet? Well, you've got to look for what are called indicators. And this memorandum, I encourage people to go and actually look at the document, because so much what I'm saying here is directly quoted from it. I know it sounds crazy, but I'm not paraphrasing. It lists what the administration considers indicators of forthcoming political violence, like, for example, the gruesome murder of conservative commentator Charlie Kirk. It says, here are the list of these indicators. And those indicators, as it turns out, describe at least millions of people in the country. So it was like anti-Christian sentiment, anti-Americanism, whatever that means, it was something like traditional family values. I mean, the list goes on and on. It's just so vague to the point that I don't even think it's necessarily left-wing. It sounds like it's just anyone who isn't MAGA.
Attorney General Pam Bondi's ordered the FBI to compile a list of what the Justice Department is calling domestic terrorist organizations. Last week, Bondi sent a memo to all federal prosecutors and law enforcement agencies targeting a wide range of people, including those who hold what she calls, quote, extreme views in favor of mass migration and open borders, adherence to radical gender ideology, anti-Americanism, anti-capitalism, or anti-Christianity, unquote. The memo also targets people who show, quote, hostility towards traditional views on family, religion, and morality, unquote. The investigative journalist Ken Klippenstein published a copy of Bondi's memo on his Substack page on Saturday. Klippenstein notes Bondi's language echoes a national security presidential memorandum issued by President Trump known as NSPM 7 to target nonprofits and activists.
As the Trump administration uses the guise of national security to carry out their extrajudicial killings in the Caribbean Sea, journalists have been pressing the Department of Justice to answer whether those they deem domestic terrorists could also be executed here inside of our own borders. Terrifyingly, Nick Turse of The Intercept reports that they're refusing to answer. Democratic Representative Tammy Duckworth told The Intercept, if Trump is using this justification to use military force on any individuals he chooses without verified evidence or legal authorization, what's stopping him from designating anyone within our own borders in a similar fashion and conducting lethal, militarized attacks against them? This illegal and dangerous misuse of lethal force should worry all Americans, and it can't be accepted as normal. It's impossible to keep track of all the terrible things that this administration is doing, but NSPM 7 represents an existential threat to not only the Constitution, but to our lives. By these broad definitions, barely anybody will meet the threshold to be safe from, at best, mass surveillance, and at worst, more extrajudicial justice.